On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode 65, created on December 19th, 2023. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota and Neil on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Hello, gentlemen. Tonight, I'm drinking one of my favorite beers, Bourbon County from Goose Island. This is the 2023 vintage, hot off the shelf.
Jeff, I am glad that you are drinking something that makes you so happy, because I had a very difficult time choosing my beer this week because of a lot of raw emotions. I first of all considered nerve endings, since my nerve endings were frayed. I considered the Lost IPA because while that's what our defense is, I thought about Truth in the Juice because that's probably a good description of what this episode is going to be. But in the end, I chose something that was a representation of the Joe Barry defense, and I think the intellectual level of the Joe Barry defense, which is scratch and sniff.
And I was tempted to go with straight tequila, but instead I just mixed it up a little bit, made it a margarita. All right, you can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast Green Bay Chat. And our audio is available on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify by searching for Green Bay Chat. What are we looking at this week? It is that Week 15 matchup at home against Tampa. There are some positives we'll take out of this, and we'll probably touch on the negatives as well. Hey, we've got a great rookie named Jayden Reed. We want to talk about him, as well as a player of the past. It's Festivus week, and we will have an airing of the grievances, and we will look ahead to Week 16, Christmas in Charlotte, with a history report as well. All right, gentlemen, let's get up. Let's start with something good. All right. 34-20 is the score. It's a loss at home against Tampa. There's still some good to come out of this game. I think the game started well, right, Neil?
Our first pass, we had a 7-yard pass to Dobbs, somebody who's been overlooked, I think, in recent weeks. And then our second play was even better, a 20-yard run by Aaron Jones. We had a perfect first two plays for our offense. Okay, can we stop here? But continuing on, our offense made a number of really solid plays, including critically on 3rd and 6, Jordan Love throwing a 20-yard pass to Jayden Reed. And it was that building of momentum that I think was a theme over the past few weeks, certainly, but also a theme in the game that we had. There were a lot of really good conversions that we had on the offense, moving the ball forward. And unfortunately, however, that drive ended with something that I think is also a theme of the game. So we finally get ourselves close to the end zone. We're in red zone territory. We start out well with a 7-yard run by Aaron Jones, followed up by a 2-yard run to Aaron Jones. It's now at a 3rd and 1, and we're in shotgun formation, -1 yard run for Aaron Jones. And then on 4th down, an incompletion to Jayden Reed that had some issues as far as maybe it wasn't thrown perfectly, although he was covered reasonably well as well. And, we sputtered. And in the end, the sputtering is the problem when you have a defense that is never going to be able to stop the other team. And the field goals ended up hurting us more than I think they would have in a normal game. But specifically, Aaron Jones had 44 yards rushing on the first drive, except it ended up being 43 because of that -1 yard run. And unfortunately, we did not keep up that momentum with Aaron Jones in the game. The only thing that's positive about that, going out on 4th down and missing, is at least we kept Tampa Bay very deep in their own territory. But this sputtering as we got close was a recurring theme.
And for the game, it was 2 for 5 in the red zone, as you mentioned, and as we're going to hammer home here. If you've got a defense that can't stop the other team, trading 4th down turnovers and or field goals when you get in the red zone, it's not going to cover it. And the Packers were 0 for 2 on 4th down as well. It's a losing proposition to trade field goals for touchdowns. But we got bailed out.
Thank you, Kingsley and Igbari.
So the team early in the season, right, we know that they have struggled early. We're always grateful to see something spark right away. And this time, good spark, falls apart. Defense comes in. We're worried about this defense, right? We're worried, especially after the Giants game last week. What is this defense going to do? And they really opened up with some life right away. And just a beautiful strip sack, fumble recovery. JJ Enagbari is the hero of the moment. Just an amazing sequence of events for the Packers and the Packers defense.
Well, and this is what we were hoping that they would be able to do to Baker Mayfield, right? Because he is susceptible to when he gets blitzed, when pressure gets put on, he has a tendency to do stupid things. And he held the ball too long, strip sack, and so the Packers are in business, and they're in the red zone. They're right there.
And we took advantage of it. Now, we had another negative yardage play by Aaron Jones to start that next drive. But Jeff, you're the tight end aficionado. Let's hear your take on that touchdown.
It's Tucker Kraft, man. Not only is he willing to block, but he's an animal. This is what everybody was hoping for. Draft the kid from South Dakota, the jackrabbit, right? See what this guy does. And he's like one of us, right? He's like, this guy was born to play in Green Bay, and he's gotten his chance. And you know what? He has really, really performed well. Crowd loves him. And it seems like Jordan Love is kind of developing this comfort level with him, which is exactly what we need. Tight end and all.
Yeah. And the best part, Jeff, like you said, he gets that ball and he is not going to take no for an answer. He turns around and really just puts his head down and gets in the end zone.
His relentlessness is just gorgeous to watch. As somebody who loves smashing into people and hitting people on the football field, or at least did back in the day, just to see somebody who is able to just destroy other players and just going with an utter fearlessness on the football field.
But with not a reckless abandon, I feel. I mean, he's got, he's a big guy, but he's not like really, really sacrificing his body. He's just doing it in such a way that when he gets that ball in his hand, if I'm a defensive back, man, I don't want to tackle this guy. Put together some really good games. With Tucker's touchdown, we're ahead 7-3. Things are looking pretty positive, right? The defense gets a key turnover. So that fourth down non-conversion in the red zone. Okay, we got bailed out. Go defense.
And on the first drive for the defense, they had a key sack on 3rd and 6 of Baker Mayfield that forced that field goal. So we've seen good defensive plays, maybe not throughout all of Tampa Bay's first drive, but we saw good defensive plays for the Packers defense in the first 2 Tampa Bay drives. I wasn't exactly feeling great, but at least I was thinking, wow, there's spark is in this defense, and maybe it's going to be a game that works out for us.
Now, Neil, you said a mouthful. The sack was on 3rd down. So that was really the key here, because when the defense did have a sack, if it wasn't on 3rd down, it didn't make a damn bit of difference, did it?
Yeah, that was the quietest 5-sack game I think that I've ever seen the Packers play in. And going back to the Buccaneers' first drive, what was the first play from scrimmage in that game? An 11-yard pass to Godwin. And if we had known then that was going to be essentially repeated 10 times throughout the game, and then another 10, 15 times to other receivers, well, we wouldn't have been quite as encouraged. I mean, certainly on that first drive, the ability of Tampa Bay to move the ball downfield with some big plays, another 24-yard pass, a 12-yard conversion to Godwin as well. They really moved the ball on us passing in that first drive. And thankfully, in the first drive, they decided, well, we're going to run too. They had a 3-1-5, -1 and 5-yard run. And unfortunately for us, the Tampa Bay offense adjusted and decided, yeah, fuck that. We're not running anymore. If we can throw like this, why would we ever run the ball? And essentially they ran only minimally until the 4th quarter when they were trying to kill the game off.
Well, and when the Packer defensive scheme allows wide open receivers in the first 8 to 10 yards almost from the line of scrimmage, why wouldn't you keep passing to your wide open receivers?
So consistent with the defense playing well and the offense having a good enough game, the first quarter ended with the Packers ahead 7-3, even on first downs, essentially even on yards, 75 to 66 between the two teams. The only real difference was the Tampa Bay turnover, but an extremely even first quarter of the game. And if we keep that up, well, we're in good shape. I feel that at Lambeau, this should work out pretty well.
But we didn't keep it up, now did we?
There's so many things that we can talk about. This young offense is so strong. There are so many things that we like about it, and just the inability to overcome the ineptness of this defense is what's going to be a theme of this season. And even in your graphic here, Neil, it's 3rd and 4, and nearly half the defense is beyond that first down marker there.
Beyond that, that's the meme that they're in outer space, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 4 guys that are almost 10 yards off the line of scrimmage. This isn't like a Hail Mary situation. This is 3rd and 4 in the first fucking quarter. I mean, come on.
But I mean, that defense is geared towards preventing explosive plays. So obviously we prevented explosive plays during the game, right? I mean, we kept everything in front of us. It was bending and no breaking, right?
Can we fairly say that this defense did not get burned deep in this game? But they get burned on a 4-yard pass and give up 50 yards after the catch untouched. I mean, what's worse?
Both are inexcusable. I mean, if this is what these high draft choices, especially defensive backs, right? If they're good at press coverage, why are they not playing press coverage, for Christ's sake? They're letting the receivers run right past them or catch the ball right in front of them. There's nothing they can really do, no matter how fast or how good or how much of a ball hawk they are. If the receiver has got 5 or 6 yards to work with in front of them, what do they do?
From those positions, perfect defense and perfect tackling still means it's a first down.
Which sort of defeats the whole purpose. What chance do they have to intercept the ball? 0. They can't. They're not there. They're not close. And Baker Mayfield is a smart enough quarterback where it's like, take what the defense gives you. Well, shit, if the defense is going to roll out the red carpet, no wonder he passed for 381 fucking yards. He just, took what the defense gave him, which was a lot. So Tucker. So he continued to have a great game. Once the Packers get the ball back, the offense stuttered, it moved well, and then it stuttered again. But the main point is that Tucker was the man. 2 very, very important catches, moving the ball. That 36-yarder was a thing of beauty.
When is it that he takes it in the boys, Jeff?
It was that run, actually. Wait, hopefully he's done trying to hurdle people.
Yes.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, that was the play. He got it. He was rumbling down the field, and he tried to. Yeah, that was not ill-advised, and it was. Oh, it's a lower. It's a lower stomach injury. Right?
Lower groin injury.
Exactly. In basketball. Yes. I love that. Oh, it's a lower stomach injury.
Well, it does feel like it's in the lower stomach after a bit. Yes.
Yeah, but no, that was pretty clear, and yeah. Hopefully, these hurdling days are over.
But unfortunately, that drive stalled because Kenyon Drake got the ball on first down after that Tucker Kraft play and got a grand total of 0 yards. And we had 2 short passes that basically did nothing. We had to settle for the field goal. And this inability to rely on the running game after that first drive definitely hurt us.
At this point, I was already thinking, oh boy, suddenly, we haven't had any success other than that first drive running the ball, and it just sort of devolved from there, didn't it?
So can I give you the numbers for our running the ball in the second quarter? We had a net -1 yard rushing in the second quarter. Mm-hmm. Now, it was only -1 because of the Jordan Love kneel down at the end of the first half, but we also only had 3 yards rushing in the third quarter. So we had a net of 2 yards rushing over the second and third quarters combined. And it was, as much as anything, we did not even try. We had 4 total rushing attempts for 2 yards over 2 quarters of football. And I think this is one thing, right? Matt LaFleur certainly has the easy scapegoat in this game because of Joe Barry and all of the ire at Joe Barry. That's all well-deserved. But there were some absolute questions of play calling that were made in this game. And asking Matt LaFleur, well, why did we only have 2 yards rushing over 2 quarters of football on 4 total attempts? That certainly is something that needed to be put front and center. And all of the Joe Barry issues basically covered up for some offensive play that was not ideal. And it was not that it was not ideal from our quarterback. It was that it was not ideal from a play calling perspective.
Well, and that's what begs the question. They weren't that far behind, right? I mean, it wasn't like they had to pass to catch up, that there wasn't enough time left in the game. It's just like they were like, okay, screw it. We're not going to run the ball. And time again, whether it's Matt LaFleur's offense or almost any Packer offense, it's December at Lambeau Field. You run the ball for success. You run the ball for championships. The weather was, bailed him out. The weather was actually quite nice, right? It wasn't snowing. It wasn't 10 degrees. It wasn't crappy. The field was in good condition, but you still run the ball to control the clock, to give your defense, such as it is, a little bit of a break, but you run the ball for success.
Yeah, and after the first drive, Jones 4 rushes for 10 yards. Patrick Taylor had 1 rush in the entire game for 5 yards, and then Kenyon Drake 1 rush for 0 yards. I mean, we only had 17 rushes total in the game against 41 passing plays. That's not a recipe for success in December in Lambeau. Even with good weather, even with your quarterback playing well, you need to have that better balance, and we did not have that balance in this game.
It's one of those things where we all have a lie that we believe no matter what. And for us, I think it's that we believe that Green Bay is going to commit to the run. Hey, next game, we're going to commit to the run. And you're right. It's probably a 30-year consistency that we've been believing that. But in big picture thing, though, score-wise, tied at 10, they get the field goal 13-10 at the end of the first half. From a score perspective, you're looking at this going into halftime thinking, all right, let's get some decent adjustments made here. The offense knows what's working. They can push it downfield. If the defense can get back to what they were on those opening drives, they can play strong. For the most part, I can't say the defense was doing anything wrong, but they weren't doing a lot right either, right?
This is the thing. I said the first quarter numbers were even. The second quarter numbers were not even. And the key was 145 yards for Tampa Bay to 71 for the Packers, 131 yards of passing offense for Tampa Bay in that second quarter. And they also abandoned the run, but they had good reason to abandon the run. They only had 14 yards rushing in the second quarter. They didn't need to run. They realized, oh, wait, running's just getting in the way of us running over Joe Barry's defense.
Well, you're right. And as I said before, if the Packers couldn't demonstrate that they could stop the pass, which they couldn't, why wouldn't Baker Mayfield, he's got to be going, holy shit, this is great. You're expecting, especially like you said, after halftime, everybody was expecting an adjustment. No adjustments were made. So now we kind of get into this, okay, why are things like this not happening? The slot receivers are just wide open, damn near every time. Now, Baker Mayfield had some very nice, tight window throws. Okay, fine. But they were still open. And they were open often, and they were getting yards after the catch. Again, they weren't giving up, well, until towards the end, a big, chunk play. But again, that pass only traveled, 6, 8, 10 yards downfield. So that's what it was. Now, this is not the Bears offense where they're throwing it parallel, east and west. They were throwing it downfield. Now, this is one of the few games that we've seen, and certainly this is the most yards the Packer defense has given up, but to a passer this year. But holy crap, it was way too easy. They were just open. They weren't, the defensive backs weren't even around to contest the catch. As I said before, they didn't have a chance to intercept the ball because they weren't close to the fucking thing.
And it's 2 weeks in a row. You're right about if they're going to give you the pass, keep going for it. And that's what the Giants did last week. And Tommy DeVito starts off the game not throwing any balls past the line of scrimmage, like you said, Jeff. Mm-hmm. And I think that their coordinators were watching that game well enough that they said, they're giving this to you. Just hit these spots and have the faith, have the confidence to do it. And Baker Mayfield, we talked about this last week. Remember, 2 years ago, he came here with a Cleveland team on Christmas Day. Last year, he came with the Rams team, started both of those games, played average at best, but it was what you would expect from a guy who's going to bounce around from team to team. Yeah. He's found a home in Tampa Bay. The Buccaneers are playing better than expected for this season. And he has a career performance on this defense because they let him have it.
And once they decided that Baker Mayfield's just going to throw, and that's all they did, that's what the numbers say. If you look at the second and third quarter combined, Tampa Bay had 14 first downs. 13 of those were by passing, 1 by penalty. 13-0 in first downs passing versus running. Baker Mayfield in the second and the third quarters, 17 of 23, 271 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. That's in one half of a game. Hit those numbers. Those are full game numbers with a really good quarterback. Half a game. That's just insane to think about that much production in that little game time.
The Packers did get to him. There were a number of sacks. Like you said, Neil, it was a quiet 5-sack game. I mean, which is incredible. So they were getting to him. they were putting pressure on him, but they weren't.
Occasionally they were putting pressure on
Right.
him.
See, that was the thing. They either got there or they didn't get close. It was sort of either a feast or famine, where he wasn't under a lot of duress until he was. But it's like there was no fear of the pass rush because they knew that they could still keep throwing the ball down the field. They didn't try to run to, like, play action or something just to keep the defense honest. There was no concern about that they were going to be stopped. And you know what? They were right. And that's the most disconcerting thing, I think. The team on the other side of the ball, if they have no respect for you, if they don't give a crap what you're going to do, they're just going to say, okay, we're going to go out here and impose our will. Most of the time that's running, not passing. And it was through passing. And it was unbelievable. I mean, shit, Baker Mayfield could have had 400 plus yards if they just would have needed it, because he just would drop back and 10, 15 yards. And some of these 2nd and 19s and some of these big down to goes didn't phase them at all either. I mean, they were 7 for 11 on 3rd down, didn't have to go for it on 4th down. They only punted once.
The other thing that's amazing on his stats is he only threw 28 times as well. He's 22 of 28 on the game and gets 381 yards off of that and 4 touchdowns. You're right, Jeff. It felt even more like it was a constant passing attack. You're expecting Marino 50 pass attempt numbers.
No. He didn't need to, because it was too easy.
So we did actually do something useful in the 3rd quarter. Maybe the defense didn't, but our offense did. The first drive was a 3 and out, where we again were ineffectual on our running, got a grand total of 3 running yards. It was our total for the 3rd quarter. But our second drive of the 3rd quarter, we put together a sustained drive. And this is a drive where Dontavian Wicks was an absolute star with 2 20-plus yard receptions and also some other big passes to Heath and Melton. It was a drive that was sustained. I think that was the key thing. We kept making plays. And by we, I don't mean our running game. I mean, it was Jordan Love and his receivers that kept putting it together. And then we got down into the red zone and it looked like we were going to falter again. After a first down from Melton, 3-yard negative yard pass to Taylor, negative 1 yard pass to Taylor again. And so now it is 3rd down and 14, and we're kind of in bad situation. We're down 10 points, but thankfully Jordan Love and Jayden Reed have a connection.
This is what we like to see, and this is so encouraging just for the entire year. Jordan Love rolling to his right and just throwing, just call it Rodgers-esque or whatever. Pick a really, really good, competent all-star or Pro Bowl quarterback. That was this throw. Again, just one of these, and Love has been doing these throws at least one a game now for a string of games. The holy crap, because it looked like he was sort of throwing it away at first, but he wasn't.
What I think was most impressive is, first of all, he bought time with his legs, and then he had a clear path towards getting maybe not the first down, but getting at least close to first down. And he was still thinking pass the whole way. There was nobody in front of when he threw that ball to Reed. And he's like, oh, I've got a guy I can get to. I'm going to get the touchdown here. And he did it.
Yes. So it was Devontae Adams-esque maybe, or whatever, this is a rookie receiver.
You know what, Jeff? I don't think we should be comparing to former Packers players, because this group on the quarterback, on the receivers, they're defining their own terms. I love enjoying these players on their terms.
This is a rookie receiver making a non-rookie catch. It's not 1 foot anymore like in college, like he had last year. 2 feet down, fantastic catch.
So the Reed touchdown brings it to within 3, right? Down 3 at halftime, now down 3, 20 to 17. But Neil, to coin a phrase, it just gets worse, doesn't it?
It just gets worse, doesn't it? Yeah, our defense just was our defense in the game. And in the subsequent drive, 3 passes of over 20 yards, a defensive pass interference. Eventually, they get a touchdown pass to a player who hadn't even had a reception all year for the touchdown. And, well, I mean, what the hell can you do? And I think from there on out, it felt like we were essentially just sort of trying to keep the game close. And I think on the Packers subsequent drive, when we got down into field goal range, again, a couple of big plays, including a great love shove, we get down into field goal range and we once again are unable to convert. We get a 3-yard Jones run, a 3-yard pass to Jones, incompletion. We have to settle for the field goal. And what I stated at the time is that field goal assumes that we're down 7 at this point. That field goal assumes that our defense is going to be able to stop them. And I had zero confidence in that. I thought that we almost had to go for a touchdown at that point because that meant that maybe we could stop them at a field goal and it would keep it as a 1-score game. I just had no confidence that a 7-point game that our defense was going to be able to keep it a 1-score game. And sure enough, their next drive, they went and scored a touchdown. We screwed around a little bit. They ran over us a little bit in the fourth quarter, but in the end, that was that. Our inability to score the touchdown on that drive and then our inability to stop Tampa Bay on their last touchdown drive, that was pretty much the nail in the coffin, no matter where Jeff threw his dagger in the game.
Yeah, they just couldn't stop anybody at the end. And when key stops were needed, and Love did have a costly turnover there, and so it evened the turnover battle, but the game at that point was pretty close to out of hand.
But was it a costly turnover? It was a 4th and 10 when we were going for it. And yes, Love went way back, and you can argue it way too many plays where Love was doing the 15-step drop out of a shotgun.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was a 4th down when we had the sack fumble of Love. And I just thought the game was essentially decided before that point. And what is Love going to do? He's trying to extend the play as long as possible. And it ended up not working. But I can't say that Love fumble had any impact on the final outcome of the game. All right. End of game statistics. Some of the numbers actually looked shockingly even. I think the big numbers from my perspective, 18 passing first downs for Tampa Bay out of 22 total first downs, one also by penalty, which was on a pass interference. So essentially 19 of 22 of their first downs were due to the passing game. Tampa Bay was 7 out of 11 on third downs, but I think even that's deceptive because in that deciding third quarter, Tampa Bay was only 2 out of 2 on third down conversions, but they had 8 first downs. They basically weren't even getting to third down most of the time, and then they'd convert it. Total yards, 452 for Tampa Bay to 321 for Green Bay, 353 net passing yards for Tampa Bay, 60 net running yards for the Packers. And I think that 60 net running yards is something that really hurt us in the end. And we needed a perfect offensive game plan if our defense was going to play a pile of shit like this. We did not have a perfect offensive game plan. We had an offensive game plan that was probably close enough, but not when the defense plays like that.
And there was a couple other statistics. Baker Mayfield had a perfect passer rating, the only visiting quarterback in Lambeau Field history to have a perfect passer rating. The other thing I noticed was that Jonathan Owens and Rudy Ford, 2 of the Packer defensive backs, had between the 2 of them had 20 tackles, which was roughly a third of all of the tackles that were made for the team. Not a good sign when your 2 defensive backs have a third of the tackles. And finally, the stat, I think, the sort of the coup de Gracie, Neil, Baker Mayfield, 10.7 net yards per pass.
Net. That includes the 5 sacks. If you just look at the number of yards divided by the number of passes made, it was 13.6 yards per attempt on passing plays that didn't end up in sacks. 13.6 is your number in the books. You don't see numbers like that except against Joe Barry.
And as we said before, a career day, another career day back-to-back for middling quarterbacks. And you take a look at how the Giants played against the Saints and what the Saints defense did this week to the Giants. And you can clearly say this is an issue of the defense. We've been harping on it this season. There was a bit of a stretch there where we thought, oh, maybe they figured it out, but they haven't. This is not going to get better before it gets worse. We already know that Matt LaFleur has come out and said, now is not the time to fire his defensive coordinator.
Matt LaFleur's wrong on that, by the way.
Yeah, I really was hoping he would have woken up Monday morning with the courage, but we've got 3 more games to really survive. And while these are 3 winnable games and the playoffs are not out of the picture, do you really want to go to the playoffs with this defense?
Yes, because I want this young, Jeff, I disagree with you on this. I want to see our young players get a taste of the playoffs. I think there is something to be said for getting that, feeling the nerves of a playoff game and feeling the excitement and realizing this is something that I want to get back to. And when you lose out a season, when you fail out at the end of the season, you don't get that growth level that you're going to get from playoff experience. And I don't care if we would end up being killed by a San Francisco or by a Philadelphia or whoever it ends up being, what would be the 2 seed if we make it. That experience will be invaluable as far as their growth moving forward. It's going to help their hunger as far as want to get back there and actually be a team that wins in those playoff games. I'm looking forward to that in the future. I would love them to have that opportunity for the first time here. And you can go back to the Packers 2009 season, the year before they won the Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers, his first season that he makes the playoffs, second season as a starter. And we lost 51-45 to Arizona in the playoffs in a game that was really back and forth. I actually watched it in Key West with our friend Dawn, who was turning 40 that day. And you could see the growth in that Packers team, even though we lost. You could feel the hope for the future of the Packers, even though we lost that day to the Arizona Cardinals. And God, do I want to see our team moving in that direction, having that hunger for wanting to continue to get better, to build, to be a better team, to want a team that is capable of challenging for a championship.
Well, that was well thought out, and I walked into that one, but just to see them get their ass handed to them,
I think I'm with Jeff on this one. I just don't want to have to watch it on television and have that out there for posterity. I totally get your point, though, Neil.
Yeah, and they've had some primetime games, and like I said, that's all part of that growing experience. You know, getting into the playoffs, provided that happens, it lines up, the planets line up, whatever. Part of the issue that I have with them getting to the playoffs is that there's still then that possibility that Joe Barry doesn't get fired. Right, because that they made it through. I mean, there needs to be
Jeff, an ass kicking would guarantee Joe Barry gets fired no matter what.
It's just yeah,
you're trying to play both sides of the coin there. Yeah, it's one of those things where you want it to happen, but you don't want it to happen, right?
Right.
I mean, and all that aside, we know there are some positives of this season.
Yes,
we know that the problem is not on the offensive side of the ball. We've talked about Jordan Love. His numbers have been flourishing. He has shown that he has grown as a quarterback this season. We are there watching everything that he does. We're addicted to Love, Neil. We certainly are. But it's Jayden Reed, the rookie, that we really like. And let's take a look at some of these numbers. Through 14 games, Jayden Reed has 54 catches, 592 yards, and 6 touchdowns. At the moment, through 14 games, that currently puts him second all-time in catches for Packer rookies and 8th all-time in receiving yards for, again, players in their rookie season. Now, let's take those numbers and as we like to expand the data, he is on pace for 65 catches, 718 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns, albeit through 17 games. But 65 catches would shatter the franchise rookie record. Sterling Sharpe has 55. Billy Houghton has 53 in the rookie seasons. Receiving yards at 718 would be 4th all-time, ahead of James Jones at 676 and Greg Jennings at 632, and a little bit behind that Sterling Sharpe guy as well. 7 touchdowns would be 3rd all-time behind Houghton with 13, McGee with 9, and Christian Watson, you remember, had his 7 touchdowns last season. So looking at Packer rookie numbers, Billy Houghton had 53 catches for 1,231 yards.
In 12 games. In 12 games
in 1952. Here's the best part. You know what the record of that 12-game season was? They were 6-6 that year. So, and Houghton just dominated as a rookie. Sterling Sharpe's rookie season, 55 catches, 791 yards, but only 1 touchdown. That's in 16 games. So Jayden Reed in some very good company with some great names in Packer history. And my gosh, Neil, I think that brings us to a Packer player of the past.
Sterling Sharpe, a Packers player who should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame based on his accomplishments during his brief career. Sterling Sharpe was born in Chicago and grew up in Georgia. He went to college at the University of South Carolina, and during his time as a Gamecock, he had 169 receptions for 2,500 yards and 17 touchdowns, and that certainly put him on the radar of scouts. And the 1987 Packers were a terrible team. It was the last year Forrest Gregg. They were 5-9-1. So they had the 7th overall pick in the draft, and they selected Sterling Sharpe. Now, interestingly, 2 other Hall of Fame receivers were selected very close to that. Tim Brown was the 6th selection, and Michael Irvin was the 11th selection in that draft. The first year of Sterling Sharpe was also the first year of Lindy Infante, and I think that we may have had more Lindy Infante than we deserved based on Sterling Sharpe. But be that as it may, Sterling Sharpe had to deal with the quarterback tandem of a young Don Majkowski and Randy Wright. And the Packers that year only had 13 total passing touchdowns. As John mentioned, Sterling Sharpe only had 1 touchdown, but somehow managed to have 55 receptions for 791 yards in that rookie season. Sterling Sharpe's second season, though, however, was the Magic Man season, in which the Packers went 10-6. Don Majkowski with 27 touchdowns. Sterling Sharpe had 12 of those touchdowns, along with 90 receptions and 1,423 yards in his sophomore season. He led the NFL in receptions in his second year. He broke the Packers records for both receptions and for receiving yards in that year, passing Don Hutson, who is the previous Packers record holder with 74. Yeah, Don in 1942. The Packers receptions record went back to 1942 with Don Hutson. Yeah, and that was only in 11 games. But yeah, the Packers had some weaknesses as far as receiver over the year. John's love of Carroll Dale notwithstanding. But nonetheless, the Packers Magic Man season obviously is one that we all enjoyed, although I will note, John, the Packers only had a +6 point differential that year. Their Pythagorean record was only 8-8, and they certainly regressed that following year. In 1990, Don Majkowski got injured. Anthony Dilweg had 7 starts, and Blair Keel also had a start in that season. He regressed a bit down to 67 receptions, only 6 touchdowns. 91, we dealt with Mike Tomczak, Don Majkowski, and Blair Keel. And Sterling Sharpe again had a down year compared to his sophomore year, 69 receptions, only 961 yards in his 4th year, and only 4 touchdowns. And this was not a good trajectory, but of course, we all understand that that was all due to atrocious quarterback play. And thankfully, in 1992, the Packers actually acquired a quarterback who would go on to be one of the greatest ever in Brett Favre. And although Don Majkowski was the quarterback for the first 2 games, Favre, with a 9-5 record in the games he started in that Cincinnati game, allowed Sterling Sharpe to truly shine. And in that 1992 season, Sterling Sharpe had 108 receptions, leading the NFL in receiving, 1,461 receiving yards, leading the NFL, and 13 total touchdowns, also leading the NFL. He broke the NFL records in receptions in a season with that 108, beating Art Monk's 106, and he won the NFL's receiving Triple Crown, leading the league in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. That had been previously accomplished by Ray Flaherty in 1932, Don Hutson 5 times in 36 and 41 through 44, Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch in 1951, Raymond Berry in 59, Jerry Rice in 1990, Steve Smith in 05, and Cooper Kupp in 2021. So something that has not been accomplished very often, other than Don Hutson doing it 5 times. Nobody had done it more than once, but Sterling Sharpe is one of those small numbers of receivers that had a receiving Triple Crown. He also ended up finishing 4th in MVP voting in that 1992 season. That was a year where Steve Young won the NFL MVP. The 1993 season that he followed up with was actually at least as good, finishing with 112 receptions, breaking his own single season receiving record, 1,274 yards receiving, 11 touchdowns. He was AP1 that year. I will note that in that 93 season, Favre only had 19 touchdown passes. 11 of those touchdown passes were to Sterling Sharpe, just as a reference for these ridiculous receptions numbers that Sterling Sharpe had. In 1992, Sharpe had 108. Second was Andre Rison with only 93, a 15 reception gap. In 1993, Sharpe had 112. Second was Rice at 98, 14 behind. Irvin was third at 88. He not only was better than anyone else, he was way better than anyone else as far as his receptions in that year. But the crowning achievement of that 1993 season is pictured in this photo. The Packers played the Detroit Lions in the wild card game. The Packers returned to the playoffs, and Sterling Sharpe finished that game with 5 receptions, 101 yards, 3 touchdowns, including the game-winning touchdown that is pictured here. The Packers won that game. The Packers won the first playoff game in the Mike Holmgren and Brett Favre era, despite Barry Sanders rushing 27 times for 169 yards in that game.
I remember the rainbow call, watching that game and just couldn't believe it. The Jim Irwin, Max McGee team, the call on the radio, and it was like, okay, this team might actually, they're good, and they're could be destined for greatness. But it's amazing that Sterling Sharpe, early in his career, just had such shitty quarterbacks and was yet still so good. And then when he got a good quarterback in Favre, was the best.
Unfortunately, the Packers played the Cowboys in the divisional round the following week and lost to the Cowboys 27-17. I just want to make a note. I looked back at that divisional game, and Mike Holmgren was on tilt as far as the play calling in that game. Favre threw the ball 45 times and was sacked twice. So 47 dropbacks for Favre in that game, 331 yards. We rushed 13 times for 31 yards total. So a 47-13 imbalance certainly played a role in our loss to Dallas. Sterling Sharpe still had 6 receptions, 128 yards, a touchdown. The 94 season, though, is when the Packers really took a different leap, and Brett Favre in particular took a leap as far as his ability is concerned. He certainly put himself in the discussion for NFL MVP in that 94 season, although he did not yet win it that year. The Packers were 4th in the NFL in points, and that was due in large part to Sterling Sharpe. Favre had 33 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. Sharpe had 94 receptions for 1,119 yards and 18 touchdowns, leading the NFL. Second in that 94 season was Jerry Rice at 13. So a lead of 5 touchdowns over the second best. And second best is only like the greatest receiver of all time, maybe other than Don Hudson. And to show how dominant Sterling Sharpe was among our receiving core, our number 2 receiver for touchdowns was either Brooks or Bennett or Anthony Morgan, each of which had 4 touchdowns. And we were playing Atlanta in week 15, and he had suffered a stinger injury in that game, felt pain, numbness, tingling in his limbs, and they essentially took him out late in that game in week 15 against Atlanta. He did play week 16 of that season against Tampa Bay. That's a game that we won 34-19. Sharpe had 9 receptions for 132 yards and 3 touchdowns in that end of season game. That was Sterling Sharpe's last game for the Green Bay Packers. The Packers went on to the playoffs, and basically the offense was anemic because Favre had nobody to throw the ball to because he'd been throwing to Sharpe all year. We beat Detroit 16-12 in the playoffs that year. Big day for Favre, but lost to Dallas in the divisional round 35-9. And that's where Robert Brooks started to rise. But fundamentally, without having arguably the best player on your team in the playoffs, we were kind of destined to not have a great year. And that was obviously the big question mark leading into the 95 season. In the end, they diagnosed the abnormality at the end of December of 1994. He had loosened his top 2 vertebrae, and this vertebrae fusion injury was the end of his career. But over his short but spectacular career, he played 112 straight games. He had 595 receptions for 8,134 yards and 65 touchdowns. Those career receptions numbers put him ahead of Don Hudson in both yards and receptions, not in touchdowns with 99. And in the playoffs, Sterling Sharpe had 11 receptions for 229 yards and 4 touchdowns in 2 games because he only played that one 1993 season in the playoffs. Finally, I will note that Sterling Sharpe certainly we think should be in the Hall of Fame for his brilliance at his peak. He certainly did not make it because of injury, but Shannon Sharpe's speech at his Hall of Fame induction ceremony, I think, is the most noteworthy element. And what Shannon Sharpe said is, I am the only person in the Hall of Fame that can say I was the second best player in my own family.
Wow.
And Shannon Sharpe does not lack an ego.
That's for sure. Just ask him.
And Neil, with all those numbers, and I think we knew right away Sharpe was something special. Yeah, some people are gonna say he had the drops that rookie season. I'm not worried about it. A rookie receiver, but he only had the 1 touchdown reception, and I think that was a product of the team around him, the offense that we had, kind of anemic offense as it were. And that's why, again, when we come back to talking about this current team, in our young quarterback, in our young receiving crew, this offense is not anemic. They are putting up the numbers that we expect them to put up.
The growth, I think, is the thing that we've talked about. And just looking at Jordan Love since the start of November, 7 games, 1,876 yards, 67% completion, 14 touchdowns against 3 interceptions, 49% success rate, a 102.5 quarterback rating since the beginning of November. In that time, there are only 3 quarterbacks with a quarterback rating of over 100, greater than 10 touchdowns, and a success rate of over 48%. Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, 2 people both in the MVP discussion, and Jordan Love. And then going back to what you're saying about Jayden Reed, yes, he's got those great receiving numbers, 54 receptions, 592 yards, 6 touchdowns, but he also has 119 yards rushing with 2 touchdowns in that time period, and getting him up to 8 total touchdowns, 707 total yards. That actually already puts him 4th for total yards for a Wookiee wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, with 2 games to go for something as comparable, 3 games to go in the season. That combination of the running and the receiving is something that Christian Watson certainly showed us last year, and we're seeing it again this year. And yes, Jeff, I know you're going to complain about all of the Reed runs, but it is a component of his game, and it's a component that really means that we can't just look at his receiving numbers. He's making a huge impact overall across the board as a receiver.
I totally agree. And it's interesting, during the Tampa game, there were no jet sweeps. So it's sort of either been feast or famine here. I'm okay with like maybe 1, maybe 2 a game, because you're right, with the proper blocking, when Reed turns that corner, he's gone. I'm not totally against it, but just don't go to the well too often.
The other thing about Jordan Love and these rookie receivers is that in this game, targeting both the Wookiee wide receivers and the Wookiee tight end of Wicks, Reed, Heath, and Kraft, Jordan Love was 19 of 24 for 235 yards, 2 touchdowns, 135.2 passer rating, throwing to all of these rookies. You're not supposed to be that efficient throwing to rookies. It's got to be the veterans where you're going to be more efficient. They're making connections. They're building something. They're building something that hopefully will be special in years to come.
But in addition to that, they're not dropping the damn thing anymore. Love seems to be perhaps a little more accurate, but even if it's hitting them in the hands, they're not dropping it. And that is also making a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, just going to Love's accuracy improvement over the year. In 7 of the first 9 games this year, Jordan Love had a completion percentage of 59% or less. In the last 5 games, his completion percentages are 68, 69, 69, 64, and 74% completion in that game against Tampa Bay. Love is getting better. The receivers are getting better. This team is getting better. If only we had a fucking defensive coordinator who's competent.
And with that, Neil, it is Festivus. It is time for the airing of grievances. I got a lot of problems with you people, or maybe this team in general. Jeff, I know you have a problem with the asshats on this team.
Yes, I do, John. 19 penalties leading the NFL. That's no good. You can't have all these penalties on special teams. That is why they're one of the many reasons why they're the asshats.
Yeah, they're the asshats, but even with our liberal language use, we can't use the words that we want to use on the air for the defense and for our defensive coordinator. And what can you say about Joe Barry at this point? First of all, he should have been fired. I'm actually very concerned with Matt LaFleur not firing Joe Barry this week when it was clear that he's lost the support of this team. Matt LaFleur has the chance of completely losing the locker room by not firing Joe Barry. As I said, we could have had a random number generator choosing our defensive schemes, and I think it would have been better than what we had going on with Joe Barry in that last game. Just to remind you how bad that game was, that was a 158.3 quarterback rating. It was not only the first ever visiting 158.3 at Lambeau Field, it's the first any 158.3 perfect quarterback rating against Green Bay since 1980. We talked a lot about that 1980 Chester Markle game that we won 12-6 over the Bears. Well, Bears got their revenge in the second game that year. The Bears beat us 61-7 with a really shitty quarterback, Vince Evans, in charge, throwing for 316 yards and 3 touchdowns. Joe Barry, you've matched the worst game of our childhood with that fucking performance against Tampa Bay.
And Neil, it's not just the one game. We're not just looking at one game to say this defense is terrible and we need to fire our defensive coordinator. It is the Buccaneers game. It is the Giants game. It is the Steelers game, the Raiders game, the Broncos game, even the Falcons game. All of these games that this team is in, and this offense that we keep talking about, keeping us in games despite even their foibles, keeping us in games. And we cannot count on this defense in any way, shape, or form. And that has nothing to do with the players. The talent is there. We know the talent is there. We know that Rashawn Gary gives his heart and soul to this team every single game. And he, I look at it from, I think he's being let down. I look at the way he was pictured on the bench at the end of this last game.
Yeah.
This is a kid who he's probably taking it to heart more than anything. I think we saw Devondre Campbell online is a person who is very vocal. He's vocalizing his frustrations with this defense. You have a lot of guys who are very political in their speech and what they are saying and trying to take some of the blame. But it comes down to, you're right, Neil, it comes down to how terrible can this be for Matt LaFleur in losing the locker room in general with even just 3 games left in the season.
These are not bad players playing bad. These are good players not playing in the right scheme. And we've been saying this, for years, when Joe Barry was hired. Why the hell did they hire this guy? His defenses have historically sucked. Like, not bad. They've been awful. Historically bad defenses. So so everybody maybe thought, oh, well, what does Matt LaFleur know that we don't? Well, it's clear now through all of the drafts, through the talent that is on this defense, that it's not the talent, it's not the players, it's the coach. It's the defensive coordinator, Joe Barry.
Joe Barry not only has had historically bad defenses, but even on the occasions where they've made the playoffs, they have lost every single time they've been in the playoffs where Joe Barry has been the defensive coordinator. I would argue that our game against Tampa Bay was a playoff-like game. We were playing a team that we were competing against for a spot, and we choked. And that is being way too kind. Joe Barry has made it to the Super Bowl multiple times as a linebackers coach. This is a Peter Principle kind of situation. Joe Barry is no better than a linebackers coach. We should not have a linebackers coach being the coordinator of the Green Bay Packers defense.
And it is the scheme. To give you an example of a couple of players, Terrell Buckley was a good player. Yes, he had a good career. He ended up with 50 interceptions in his career. He was not in the right scheme in Green Bay. Aaron Campman is a guy who played really well and probably above his grade in the 4-3 defense in Green Bay. But when Green Bay switched to the 3-4 defense, it was not the right scheme for him. He left Green Bay and went on to other things. Even more recently, Oren Burks is a guy who, as a middle linebacker, showed flashes, didn't fit in the scheme in Green Bay. He's doing all right in San Francisco. But quite frankly, this scheme isn't good for anybody.
Examples of failures of this scheme in this game. Chris Godwin was lined up in order to take advantage of the Packers zone. And Chris Godwin averaged 4.06 yards of separation per target when the league average is under 3. Tampa Bay had essentially set up their offense such that Chris Godwin was going against either Devondre Campbell or Quay Walker. And Devondre Campbell specifically allowed 135 passing yards in that game. Guess what? If Devondre Campbell is allowing 135 passing yards, it's not because Devondre Campbell is inherently playing poorly. It's because he shouldn't be covering Chris Godwin. There is no way Devondre Campbell should be on Chris Godwin consistently. And if you can't make that adjustment, you're a failure as a defensive coordinator.
A lot of these defensive backs are fast and they play press coverage. We were seeing all these zones. They were not even close to the receivers. If your specialty is sticking to a guy, right, but your scheme is to line up 5-10 yards in soft coverage to not give up the big play, well, like John, you said, they didn't give up the big play, but they gave up everything else. It was the bend and break defense. It's a loss.
You had the number of long conversions on third downs, but they had 4 different times when they had, either due to penalty or due to sacks, they had a long situation to go, and we basically just let them go. 1st and 15, they get 9 yards. 2nd and 29 at the end of the first half, when we had them such that they were not going to score the field goal. We had the sack, they had the penalty. We should have prevented them from scoring a field goal at the end of the first half. It should have been tied at halftime, but no, we're going to allow a 24-yard reception on 2nd and 29, giving them field goal position. 3rd and 12, get 15 yards. 2nd and 18, get 21 yards. All of these plays where they're getting huge yardage in a situation where there's no way they should be able to get a first down. Statistically, they should not be getting first downs out of any of these situations, and yet the Joe Barry defense allows them to do that. It was such that in the game, given how ineffective our pass coverage was, the only thing that resulted in positive play was plays by the defensive line. What I said during the game is just blitz every play, because it doesn't matter if we give up a big play. Our only chance of stopping Tampa Bay was by tackling them behind the line of scrimmage, by sacking or ideally strip sacking Baker Mayfield. There's no way that they were going to be able to be stopped by the defensive scheme we had. So at least let's do the one play, the one type of play, having our defensive linemen, edge rushers, maybe blitzers, do something. Try to tackle Baker Mayfield, because that's the only way we're stopping him. We have no better plan in the game than that.
Even Preston Smith is frustrated with seeing Preston Smith as the guy out in the slot and only 2 defensive backs on a trips play. He threw his arms up. He knew he was fucked. He knew there was nothing he could do, and he went out and did his best to try to get that pass in the air. And another play that screened off to the left, and the blocking was there, and we just did not have the coverage.
I go back to the Giants game, and I'm still trying to figure out how Danny DeVito had this career game against us. Because there was a where the last 6 games or so.
I've actually got the numbers if you want me to go to that, but
yes, because I looked at that and I was like, holy Christ! On roughly 20% of every drop back that Tommy DeVito had his entire career, he was sacked.
Tommy DeVito's last 6 games.
Zero.
Tommy DeVito's Tommy DeVito's last 6 games, he's been sacked 6, 5, 9, 6, 0, and 7 times. 5 is the fewest sacks he's had in the last 5 games, other against the Joe Barry defense. You're doing something wrong if that's what the result of your defense is.
Zero. I mean, they didn't even he had 2 there were 2 quarterback hits. Not sacks, 2 quarterback hits on Danny DeVito.
And then going back to the Tampa game, and we said it, this is the quietest 5-sack game we've ever seen.
Yeah.
5 sacks, but 4 touchdown passes, no interceptions, and a perfect passer rating is just mind-boggling.
Yeah, you think 5 sacks would have at least disrupted things enough, like turn the ball over, maybe, or we did once, but and with a turnover on top of it, and it was like it's like it didn't even happen.
3 statistics to get into just how historical this debacle of a performance by our defense was. Baker Mayfield was the first visiting quarterback ever at Lambeau Field with 75% completion percentage and 4 or more touchdowns. First ever. Secondly, Baker Mayfield was the 3rd quarterback in all of NFL history with 375 or more passing yards, 4 or more touchdowns, and a 158.3 quarterback rating. That is, it's easy to get a 158.3. Well, easy to get a 158.3 if you don't throw the ball that much, but to have that much volume and to be perfect, that's actually rare. But he got to face Joe Barry. And then finally, Tampa Bay has played 29 games in Wisconsin. This is the most points Tampa Bay has ever had playing a game in Wisconsin. So whether you consider NFL history, Lambeau history, or Packers history, that was
the wrong side of history.
that was absolutely the wrong side of history. Joe Barry is not the guy. Joe Barry should have been fired this week. I don't know why we still have him as the defensive coordinator, because literally anyone, I think, could do a better job than Joe Barry is doing.
Perhaps Matt LaFleur enjoys the beef Swellington as much as I do. And with that, we need to get away from this. Let's start looking at something positive. It's Christmas. We're heading to Charlotte for week 16. The good news is this is a team that has only won 2 games this season, one of them just this past week against the Atlanta Falcons. The bad news is we still have Joe Barry as our defensive coordinator. Neil, what do we have to look forward to this weekend?
What are Carolina's weaknesses? How do their strengths match up with our weaknesses?
It's irrelevant, Neil. The question is moot because Joe Barry is our defensive coordinator.
But John, I mean, we look at the numbers, and yes, Carolina is bad as far as their offense is concerned. They're only 30th in the NFL in yards per game, but they're third in the NFL in defensive yards per game. They're only allowing 292 yards per game. They're only allowing 174 passing yards per game. They're third in the NFL.
It's irrelevant, Neil. The question is moot because Bryce Young is looking at this and saying, Tommy DeVito had a career day. Baker Mayfield had a career day. I'm going to have a career day.
But John, they're -6 on turnover ratio for the year. We're 0. Like, we're way better than they are as far as turnovers are concerned. So clearly this is a huge advantage for the Packers.
It's irrelevant because we haven't had any turnovers to speak of recently either, because we don't put anybody in position to get the goddamn ball. The question is moot.
Yeah, I mean, we can put all the numbers we want, but whatever, something's going to happen. And hopefully Joe Barry doesn't fuck us again.
Jeff, this is a game we talked about when we looked at where we were going to go this year. And we thought, oh, Charlotte would be nice. Unfortunately, it's on Christmas Day. We're not going to go to Charlotte for Christmas, but it probably would have been nice, right?
Joe Barry still is our defensive coordinator, John. The question is moot.
Well, what about those ticket prices? I mean, ticket prices were going for like 25 cents against Atlanta, and you could still buy tickets at 10 minutes before the game. Wouldn't that be nice to get into the game practically free?
Well, maybe if you wanted to see Bryce Young have a career day and you were a Panthers fan, but because we are not Panthers fans, we are Packers fans, it's a moot point.
And all that aside, what is not moot is history, because we have had success against these Carolina Panthers. Let's hope that it'll repeat again this Sunday and we'll have a nice Christmas. It should be a green Christmas this year, right? A green Christmas for the Packers and the Packer fans. But once upon a time, Jeff, we had a wonderful time in January.
Yes, the Packers and the Panthers, the NFC Championship, played on January 12th, 1997. This was the first NFC Championship win for the Packers since the 1970 merger. It was a game that would have made Vince Lombardi proud. On a frigid 3-degree but sunny afternoon in Green Bay, the Packers faced the Panthers, a franchise that was only in its second season. I had to double check that. They had compiled an impressive 12-4 record, winning the NFC West. That's not a typo. And beating the Cowboys in the divisional playoff, earning them a trip to Lambeau Field to face the 13-3 first-place Packers. The Panthers were led by Pro Bowl quarterback Kerry Collins, Pro Bowl linebackers Sam Mills, Lamar Lathan, and a guy by the name of Kevin Green. You can figure about him later on. And NFL Coach of the Year, a guy by the name of Dom Capers. Well, the Panthers came out after a couple of mistakes by Favre. The Panthers held a 10-7 lead midway through the second quarter. From here, however, the Packer offense took over, outscoring Carolina 23-3 the rest of the way, behind statement games from Ed Gab Bennett, 99 yards on 25 carries, Dorsey the Horsey Levens, 88 yards on 10 carries, and Levens was also huge in the passing game with 117 yards on 5 receptions. Overall, the Packers had 201 rushing yards, 22 first downs, and 479 total yards. Now, it just wasn't the offense. The defense also had a stellar game, holding the Panthers to just 45 yards rushing on 14 carries, 12 first downs, and 251 total yards. This was the second of 3 NFC Championship games in a row for the Packers, and this win led to Super Bowl 31, which brought the Vince Lombardi Trophy back to Green Bay. Now, this game on Sunday, it's in Carolina, so it certainly is going to be warmer, but the Packers would be well served to emulate the winning formula of that championship game. And we've mentioned this before. A solid rushing offense, a stingy defense that results in a victory that will hopefully move the Packers closer to the playoffs.
And I really feel like the one thing that, as far as history goes, that won't repeat itself is that 201 rushing yards. That's just not going to happen. So let's hope that Green Bay does well on offense. They will move the ball. And we are sure Jordan Love and his receivers, his young receivers, will have a good day.
Those 96 Packers were an historically great team. That championship game was really fun to watch, mainly because it was very low stress in the second half. That's a nice change of pace. One team that is a current team that is making comparisons to that 96 Packers team is this year's San Francisco 49ers team. The San Francisco 49ers are the third team to ever put together 3 straight wins with DVOA greater than plus 70%. The other two teams with that level of dominance, the 1989 49ers and the 96 Packers. And then last 6 teams to win at least 6 straight games by 12 or more points. This 2023 49ers team, the 2009 Saints, 07 Patriots, and then going back to the 96 Packers.
Wow.
The 49ers are bringing comparison to the 96 Packers back. And I think that there's been a lack of appreciation recently for how absolutely dominant that 96 Packers team was.
And it was dominant on both sides of the ball, which is great. And that's, we've talked about Reggie White numerous times, and we know what Reggie did in that Super Bowl. And you're right, Neil, it's nice to hear that historical comparison, but we're also at the point where it's become a generational thing now, where we waited very long for a Super Bowl. Granted, there has been one Super Bowl 45 since then, but yeah, this is a team that we have expectations. We want to see the improvement. We've gotten the improvement on the season. Let's get it and build on it. And you just look at this and you just say, you just can't lose to the Carolina Panthers. And you have to wonder what the Falcons fans are going through. They have just had to be just beside themselves with this game. And with that, any final thoughts as we get out of here, Jeff?
First and foremost, the name of the Panthers mascot is Sir Purr. Now you know that. So I was looking at some other stats. Interestingly enough, you know how we had kind of set up a number of weeks ago that the Giants game should be a win. You know, we go to the Carolina, it should be a win. So I was looking at point differentials. So currently,
Jeff,
the Carolina
question is moot.
It's moot.
Well, it is. You know, for this game it is. But I just want to give you these numbers because they're mind-boggling. So both Washington and Carolina are a minus 142 point differential, but they're not the worst team in the NFL in point differential. We've already lost to that team, the Giants, at minus 149. So you're right. The point is moot, but maybe, just maybe, because Carolina's only scored 206 points, which is one of the lowest outputs in the league. Maybe, just maybe, with the Packers at a minus 1 point differential, maybe the Packers will overcome the Panthers and Sir Purr.
Carolina is a bad team. Our defense by DVOA is worse than Carolina's defense. Fire Joe Barry.
Nice, short and to the point for once, Neil. I like it. All right, if you're watching us on YouTube, then please hit subscribe and leave a comment. Find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That's all one word. We are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and Spotify, as well as Facebook at the GBC podcast Green Bay Chat. And don't forget, Apple Podcasts is now part of our spectrum. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Fire Joe Barry.